cages. Good and evil waging over man and soul. Sending Joe beats, millennials. Expensive futures come for the price of everyone already given to the demon, the oppressor. Make with resistance, subjugate. Victimize the meek in the murder. Unholy power reigns supreme. Winning all, is the fear. Mighty weapon to be wielded. Sparing none, with their oppose. Redemption is a trademark of a goddamn boom. Overlord, still you fight for the cause is lost. Hail, the victor, master of this earth. Overlord, the weak of might, oh no death. Fables of salvation are the stories of the birth. Electronic province, souls of righteous riches in the sky. Intentions, camouflage. That we the clever tells the men that's why my other told it. That it's me the clever to the lying bastard. Dominate the distance in circumference. Persecute the conscience of the masses. Helplessly the evil model. Blood right, twirling wrong. Answer to the top when in the end. Secretly, possibly. Testimony proving we will none of us can fail. Overlord, betrayed by those who called your own. Leave of silver, negates loyalty. Overlord, blackness spreading across the land. Countless graves cry out and curse your name.
You just heard the Overlord.
From Infernal Majesty on Canadian Metal Part 4, the final epic part, where we're doing our Extreme Hall of Fame record from the Canadian side.
At least this time. I'm sure down the road there might be another Canadian Metal entry.
Sure.
But at this point, I think 4 is good.
Sure.
And we are the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And I think I was thinking about this because of some of the bands that we had in the last feature were pretty stellar bands. I mean, Voivod and Cryptopsy, Gorguts, all three of those are considered amongst the elite of Canadian extreme metal. So you may be asking, well, why throw favor to an album like None Shall Defy from Infernal Majesty, which we'll talk a little bit more about the record in just a second. And I guess the thinking that maybe, and Mark can agree or disagree with this, but I guess my thinking was, this is a record that, it's the only good record this band ever put out, and it was such a singular oddity when it kind of came out, because nothing really quite sounded like it, I guess, at least not in Canada. I mean, it's,
even in the States.
Yeah.
I mean, there's Slayerisms to it, but there's also stuff that you can't. I mean, it's like, oh, this sounds like Unanimated. Hey, but that didn't come out until another 6 years down the road,
or like Altars of Madness kind of stuff, or whatever. And so I guess the chances of us doing a feature on Voivod or on Gorguts or something like that are pretty high, somewhere in the future years to come or whatever. So but the chances of really putting a feature on Infernal Majesty outside of like a Hall of Fame kind of record like this,
well, this record's it's
pretty much it. And so much in the same way that we did with Annihilator, in that the Annihilator record is almost a singular masterpiece. You could look at the entirety of like the thrash scene in Canada, like Exciter and Razor and some of those bands that had a little bit more longevity than, and Annihilators had longevity, but nothing that sort of jumped out quite like Alice in Hell. No,
as far as one singular record that actually sums up what they were about at the time. Now it seems like a little piecemeal.
Sure. And
this record's kind of nuts. They formed in 1986.
Yeah.
And then what was this,
87? It's the years it's put out.
That's right,
the
a year
very
later.
Next year.
But this record, it seems like it was written by somebody much wiser and much more like they've actually had a pretty big back catalog before this record, and this thing just drops, and it's kind of unbelievable, like that it came out at that time. It came out in the U.S. on Roadrunner.
Yeah, a Road Racer back in the day.
Yeah, with not a whole lot of fanfare.
No. And it was hard to get for a long time until Displeased put it, basically re-released it in the late 90s, which is
because I had it in the late 90s, and then I sold it, and then I got it again recently and kind of reabsorbed it a little bit more. But
yeah, and this was a weird one because this record, along with Slaughter, Staccato. Strapato. Sorry, not staccato. Staccato is a musical term, whatever the hell strapato is. But these two records we kind of got at the same time, and I remember grabbing them off a Blogspot and kind of being like, dude, have you listened to these? Like, I don't think you had heard Slaughter, and you had heard Infernal Majesty years before, and we kind of rocked these out, and it was pretty mind-blowing, those two records, and this one stood kind of head and shoulders above a lot of that other Canadian stuff, just because it was unlike anything else at the time.
Well, and initially I think a lot of people were exposed to Infernal Majesty from Dawn, the cover that they did of Return of the Living Dead,
or Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, good movie. Night of the Living Dead, a good song.
Yeah, and good movie.
But
yeah, that off that Dawn 4-song EP, that was where I first encountered Infernal Majesty, and then you never really heard like anybody talk about it. Well, that was the sort of the strangest part about a song like that is, here it goes, it shows up on this Dawn record, and then where you didn't stumble across Infernal Majesty really anywhere else. It
was something that you'd see in interviews, but you didn't know who the hell the band was.
Yeah, Christ Denied, which I don't know if you've heard them. They did a cover of Overlord, and they're like a British extreme metal band. But it's like few and far between.
I'm kind of surprised like Seance or Satanic Slaughter, one of those bands, didn't, because you listen to this record, there's lots of, you can see where Witchery got a lot of their sound outside of just the Merciful Fate kind of angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And the influences that influence Infernal Majesty, from what we could kind of put together, the big three were Priest, Fate, and Slayer. And then I think it was Steve Terror or Kenny Hallman, the two guitar players. One of them was saying how big of an influence like Kiss was obviously on him, and Iron Maiden, and of course Rush, kind of the progenitors of Canadian metal.
The weird thing, the only reference I think that really shows through very with any kind of intensity is Slayer.
Yeah, I mean there's a few fadeisms here and there, but yeah, but Slayer, for sure, Slayer is everywhere.
Okay, it's like especially song construction. Somebody that doesn't ever get any vocal props, Tom Araya.
Yeah.
There's lots of his like phrasing and stuff like that on here, and
yeah, and in terms of the vocals and stuff, the guy who gets credited as the vocalist on the record is Chris Bailey, but in fact, from what we've read and discovered, it was actually Rick Nemes, who's the drummer on this record, who did the vocals that you just heard on Overlord and does the vocals on the whole record.
Yeah.
So I guess he was maybe brought in as like a touring member after the recording, is what my understanding is. And then to round things out, you have Psychopath on bass, Psychopath without an H. So
is Psychopath spelled without an H? Because Psycho is spelled with an H.
Yeah, on the back here it's spelled without an H. So yeah,
I didn't look up my. I'm so used to using spell check. I didn't know.
Yeah, no, it's supposed to have an H, yeah, for sure. So, but going back to like the Slayerisms and stuff, and the tune you just heard there, Overlord, which opens the whole record up. It's a song about the invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord. In terms of some of the thematic kind of things, which is odd because the rest of the record thematically, in terms of lyrics, is like just chock full of like
Satanism, all over the place,
and like occult kind of stuff. But, you've got a lot of, Celtic Frost, Bathory, Venom, Slayer kind of riffs kind of amalgamated in there. And it kind of blackens, like, all of the sort of, I guess, the Canadians' version of Slayer, I guess. Which Slayer was in Exciter. Slayer was in some of the Slaughter stuff. I mean, Slayer obviously was a band that, in Exodus, I remember those two bands really showing up a lot in a lot of the Canadian stuff for some reason. So they must have lent an ear maybe more towards the faster kind of speed metal stuff more than like the groove metal kind of mid-pace stuff that Anthrax and Metallica were kind of more known for.
I think a lot of the Canadian bands had to try even harder to kind of one up the American bands because it was so difficult it was easier to get a record contract in Canada, but that really didn't do a whole lot for you. If you got a record contract in the States, it was almost guaranteed tour plus international distribution.
Yeah.
And they were talking about this actually on it was Much Music's Pepsi Power Hour from 1988.
Nice.
Ken and Rick were on there talking about the new record, and for some reason they cut out all the videos. So they're like, "Yeah, we're going to show you a None Shall Defy video," and they cut it out and just go back to the interview segments.
Which I read about that video. They actually had Roadrunner didn't give them any money. They had to like fund that whole video themselves.
It was a friend of theirs that just shot the video and edited the thing together, but. Yeah, so they were doing this little Much Music thing, and the whole point of them being on the show outside of introducing videos was to name their mascot that's on the cover of None Shall Defy, which is like a lizard with a crown on.
Yeah, kind of a crappy mascot,
kind
unfortunately.
Of bullshitty, yeah. Which I don't know if they ever managed to really land on that, and I don't think it ever actually made it on a cover again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
but, because the weird thing, you look at these guys, you listen to music, and it's proto-death metal, all that kind of stuff.
Halloween,
but you look visually, kind of the guys look like Motley Crue.
Yeah,
like big teased out hair, and they have like this old kind of thinking style of having a mascot.
Yeah,
which who the hell has a mascot anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even then, like Slayer didn't, Metallica didn't.
Well, Slayer tried to. They had the
zombie head.
Yeah, but it wasn't really.
It wasn't like. It was more like a merchandising thing.
But, it wasn't like Eddie or
Vic from Megadeth or something. But I think a lot of they seem like they're like a kind of a contradiction, really. The whole between having this kind of old school thinking with this forward thinking music.
But that's been a weird theme that we've sort of discovered with the Canada thing, going back to Anvil. Is that there's just some things that don't always add up about the Canadian scene. I mean, it has some of the most extreme thrash and proto-death stuff coming out of it. Almost more extreme than a lot of the American stuff outside of maybe Possess and Slayer in terms of like towing that line between thrash and death metal. So and yet they have these weird oddities, like they look like Motley Crue. Like why? Why do you have to dress like that? So
and these dudes are they're from Toronto, so it's not like they're super far away from like New York or that kind of stuff. So it's funny that they're so insular.
But I guess in the pre-internet, not pre-cable, but like expanded cable world, I mean, things could be a little more insular back in the mid-80s.
Well, at this point in Canada, there's like 3 stations, I think.
Probably, yeah. So, but I mean, there's another band that kind of comes to mind that you'll for those of you familiar with them, that you'll be hearing throughout is Dark Angel. This is like almost a Canadian counterpart to Darkness Descends in terms of how that record was. It's so fast that it almost is like almost bridging on proto-death metal in a way. Outside of the vocals, really.
And it almost comes across as a novelty, I think, as far as it's just so fast. That's the it's the ultimate speed metal record or something. But
caffeine metal. I remember hearing it described.
Yeah, but it's really like there's not a whole lot of songs that really like are memorable. While None Shall Defy is filled with it. I mean, and it's across the board as far as just hooky songs or fast songs or whatever.
Well, and just in Overlord, that middle melodic kind of guitar part, there's Metallica-isms, and there's even some like things that sort of jump out to me, and you noticed it as well, that are almost like Dark Tranquillity, like the Gallery, or like kind of the older Gothenburg stuff. Not as like apparent, but it's just like hidden there, almost like how Dark Tranquillity and a lot of those Gothenburg bands were drawing from the German thrash scene a lot. You can hear
like
some of that.
Sabbath and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And Sabbath's another band. There's a lot of meandering to some of these like Infernal Majesty songs, much like you hear in like a Sabbath, British, thrash metal band, So, I mean, it's really hard to pinpoint these guys, and that's, I think, why we wanted to shine a light as a Hall of Fame record on it, because it is such a unique kind of oddity in the sort of Canadian scene, and it encapsulates a lot of that extremeness, the technicality that you heard with Voivod, Cryptopsy, Gorguts, along with that sort of like great thrash foundation that was kind of existing at the time.
Well, in the same year, let's see, what else came out? Well,
I think it's a really good contemporary.
Scream Bloody Gore.
Yeah, and Terrible Certainty.
Under the Sign of the Black Mark from Bathory.
Yeah, Napalm Death Scum, so
it's funny though that this record, None Shall Defy, is really kind of head and shoulders above, I would say, above Scream Bloody Gore and Under the Sign of the Black Mark as far as really being evocative of what metal could become.
Sure.
Yet
although Under the Sign of the Black Mark might be my favorite Bathory, but I don't know.
Yeah, but if you listen to all those records as a kid, I think Creator and Infernal Majesty would stand out, but yet Infernal Majesty just fell through the
I know
the cracks,
Yeah, exactly.
Not to be really discovered again until the 90s.
And even then, they were discovered and then just quickly forgotten yet again.
Yeah.
I mean, like, why couldn't people like us kind of, hold them afloat when like they were making appearances on Dawn and stuff like that? Although, Dawn is another band that, like, for me, I feel has always been overlooked, and when that whole big discussion of unanimated and dissection, and
they usually never come into the picture.
And I think they, some of the stuff they did was just, that level of quality, But
I think they were also fighting against. They were Swedish, right?
Yeah,
they were Swedish in a Norwegian world.
Yeah, but so were Dissection and Agafar and Unanimated. So I don't know why they couldn't carry the torch. I mean, obviously they still haven't made a follow up to Slaughter Sun, which was like kind of a masterpiece, and that probably lost a lot of momentum.
97 or 98?
97, 98, yeah. But so that's the Infernal Majesty. With umlauts, by the way, we forgot to mention
over both A's, which I don't really know if that means anything or not.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Again, part of that weird Canadian amalgamation of like sounds and textures and things. But in terms of vocals, like we mentioned Araya a lot, and there was one other guy that kind of we heard a lot of. Maybe it was Possessed. Maybe it was Becerra. There's like some Jeff Becerra.
I can see
stuff,
that. Yeah.
But
I was even saying a lot of, I think, some vocal similarities to Dark Angel as far as the speed, like the rapid fire vocals,
and not as guttural as like Dave Vincent, but maybe even some of the same kind of approaches. With the more high pitched kind of Tom Araya-isms.
It's more like Altars of Madness era kind of stuff.
And one thing I mentioned about this in the car when we were running errands earlier, and kind of listening to this and rocking it out, is this almost seems like it's like the missing evolutionary link between like the Slayer, Hell Awaits, Rain and Blood, and like Altars of Madness, Blessed of the Sick, Morbid Angel. It's like that.
Yeah.
Like it's a mixture of like both of those eras, kind of. With it's not as extreme, obviously, as Morbid Angel, but it's not as like I guess outright just in your face thrash or speed metal as the Slayer records. It's kind of something in between.
Yeah.
But
they don't have, like, Slayer has such an identity to their songwriting that you can hear like one chord and you know who it is.
Yeah.
I think Infernal Majesty they're still kind of in that stage of figuring out exactly what they wanted to sound like. But they did a really good job at it as far as having a really diverse kind of umbrella, but everything like they just going from beginning to end. It could be several different bands, but it's all done so well. It's just it's crazy that this was the first record and kind of it was the lightning in a bottle, but the last one that was really worth the crap.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't speak to the later stuff that I think they put out something in the late '90s. It didn't get reviewed very well.
They've put out several,
have they?
But I'm going to plead ignorance too.
So I mean, if people know of another one that can kind of match wits with this, please let us know for sure. So the next kind of set is it features a couple of classics of this record for sure. Obviously, what a lot of people would consider, I guess, the centerpiece of the record. It's kind of what your cup of tea is. There's a couple longer epic kind of tunes on this record, so I don't think this has to be like the whole sole focus. But the one that's most known is Night of the Living Dead, and the song right before it was a small intro called R.I.P. And it's kind of like got an acoustic black metal-y. I wrote down like kind of an eviler version of like some of the Legacy era Testament like acoustic kind of stuff. Yeah. It's dark, even though it's like a 1 minute kind of acoustic thing. And then you hear this whisper underneath that says, Satan, Satan, lead us to hell. And I mean, it's that again, it's building kind of towards Night of the Living Dead, which is like a creepy song about the zombie movie, but it also kind of goes into the occult as well. Yeah,
I really haven't read any of the lyrics, so I can't.
It's Satan's all over the lyrics, man. It's sweet. Like including the song following Night of the Living Dead, which is S.O.S. or Satan Our Savior.
Yes.
So these guys obviously were playing on that kind of taboo Satanism thing in the mid '80s that was pretty popular there for a while. But
they're pretty pleasant guys, eh? When you hear them talk on the Much Music there.
Were they?
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah,
they sound like Exciter.
Yeah, we just, after we recorded the Canadian Metal Part 1, we got the Exciter remaster, which Jeff Waters from Annihilator had done, and it had some great interview clips from the early 80s, like 82, 83.
Yeah, like from radio shows or something.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. But, I think that Night of the Living Dead is, I wrote down, it's a, masterpiece of epic dark metal craftsmanship. It's very, very sinister vocals. It's kind of built off a very complex version of like a Venom riff almost at the beginning.
I mean, it's incredibly anthemic.
Yeah.
It even has like the opener reminds me of something that would have been off Twisted Sister's Stay Hungry.
Yeah, that's that.
But more, more like minor chords or something.
And there's a lot of crazy movements. I mean, they take there's a main riff that's throughout the whole thing, but they kind of run a lot of variations on it. Like it's almost like modal jazz stuff, like what Miles Davis was doing. And somehow they sustain it for a 7 minute, 20 minute. 7 minute and 20-second song that doesn't ever get boring or like repetitive.
No, not at all.
Like there's almost no part that's the same. They don't really go back to anything.
Yeah, chock full of riffs.
Yeah, exactly. Chock full of riffs. A lot of Slayer riffs. And the main riff is just infectious. That kind of keeps bubbling to the surface throughout the whole thing.
And it's played. It's kind of played in a minor. I think it's played in a minor scale, but it's really kind of triumphant.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a John Williams thing. That would have been one of his soundtracks. Yeah, for sure.
Like a dark.
Like he would use it in Poltergeist or something.
and then you've got all these crazy tempo changes that are kind of going on throughout it, which adds a high level of, I guess, dynamicism to the song. And then all of a sudden you get to the 5 minute mark, and it goes into this like weird. I wrote down doomy death apocalypse incarnate. It's just like this really crazy part, and almost like Candlemass-ish, in a way, but meeting like a blackened thrash kind of sound. It's such a weird sound, and there's really not a lot that's ever sounded like it. And I'm sure that's why bands like Dawn and others were sort of fascinated by this song.
Well, I think the one thing that I think, if you can say a lot of their riffs might be derivative of Slayer or something, but the guitar tone is something that I've up to this point, I'm sure there was nothing that sounded exactly like that, but that would go on to influence like Tormentor and a lot of these other bands that trying to get that evil unsettling guitar tone.
Yeah,
and this is one of the first times I've really heard it done well.
Yeah, and speaking of like kind of that unsettling guitar tone, I mean, one of the things about this, because they're playing off like one main riff almost throughout the whole thing, it kind of has that, like, if you remember like in the early black metal days, especially like early Enslaved and Over and some of that stuff, and even Satyricon, and where it was like super repetitive, but yet right when you needed like kind of some kind of weird riff tempo variation, there was something there that like unlocked like the next level of a song. Mayhem did it even like on De Mysterious sometimes. And like I feel like the prototype of that is in a song like this that's 7 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like, say, Master of Puppets, which is like
the movements
repetitive
aren't quite
over
as,
and over again.
Aren't quite as apparent as something like a Metallica epic.
Yeah, exactly.
Song. The whole thing kind of flows.
This is epic, but in the way
it's not like here's the intro, here's the middle section, here's the crescendo.
Yep, yeah. It just kind of moves and meanders, and that's where I wrote down the whole Sabbath thing, which kind of meanders in that same sort of way, or like Skydancer, Gallery, Tranquility stuff. So, and then we'll end things with S.O.S, and we'll talk a little bit more about that song when we come back. So enjoy R.I.P, Night of the Living Dead, and S.O.S, or Satan Our Savior.
Participants in this unholy ritual as death fall from their earthen prisons. Bodies decayed beyond recognition. You must prepare nightmares from the darkest recesses of your imagination. Tormented by lust and watchable thirst for blood, they are driven on, losing the shackles, fear the grave. Their vengeance knows no bounds, waging hunger, pierces the black in the flicker of their morning gaze. Creatures of evil, spawn and spewed from the depths of hell, owning with desire for the flesh of the unsuspecting victims of their actor. Wanton destruction burns in their hearts as they enter the lands of the living.
That was S.O.S, Night of Living Dead, and R.I.P. So S.O.S, that's kind of like to me, the most extreme song on the record.
Satan, our savior, dude.
Yeah.
Well, this is the one that really jumped out to me as having very reminiscent to like Altars of Madness, really angular riffs, and really. I'm trying to think of another band that was really outside of Slayer that was doing this weird, like
the
they're not even
dives.
like well that and just like the time signatures. They're not. It's not like they're jazzy, but they're just. They're very unconventional compared to like what traditional heavy metal was about at the time.
Yeah. No, you're right. Like it's maybe Voivod almost, in a way was kind of coming at it from like a weird angular kind of way, and that's what you hear like the Voivod stuff and like Enslaved today.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally.
But yeah, I mean, you heard not only you got the Altars of Madness vibe that Mark was kind of talking about, but some of the weird stuff that the drummer Rick, was doing. It has almost like a grind blast beat feel to it, in there.
Yeah, he's doing. We were listening to it in the car, so it doesn't sound like he's doing anything with the kick drum, but it sounds like he's almost doing kind of a blast on. I think it's just on the snare. Yeah, just almost like kind of like a triplet or something.
Yeah, and the way the snares recorded on the record is pretty cool too. Like
recording on the entire record is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Compared to, well, like Hell Awaits has terrible production that came out a year previous to this.
2 years.
2 years previous. Yeah. And it sounds kind of like turd. Mm-hmm. I mean, compared to Rain and Blood.
Yeah, it's very echoey. That was like the way that all those old Metal Blade records, for some reason, like, and this Slagle did.
I don't know if this itself was. I didn't see anywhere in the credits that it was remastered or anything, but just the way that they captured like the drums, the vocals are a little distant. Mm-hmm. But I think those are kind of a work in progress as well. At the time, nobody knew how to really record
typical of a lot of like mid '80s thrash stuff, and I think that's why like something like say Master of Puppets or Rain and Blood was such like a breath of fresh air, because like to have like something this crisply produced,
they figured out how to record the damn
thing. You listen to like Ride the Lightning and the vocals sound like they're in a different room sometimes. It's kind of unfortunate.
They probably were.
Yeah, they probably were. Yeah, exactly. Didn't have that live feel, But there's a cool riff, that hypnotic riff that kind of opens and closes the song there is pretty neat. And like Mark said, just all the dive bomb sort of Trey meets the Slayer duo, Carrie and Jeff's kind of style of, just the way they're riffing, they're almost both playing leads against each other in a way. So it's a cool song, for sure. And it's, again, the whole record, just from start to finish, every song has something kind of dynamic going on, much like the Spotlight that we did, like Sand Annihilator, where like everything just kind of seems to have its own personality to it, but yet the whole album flows,
Yeah, there wasn't like a weak, link on the record either. The same with the Annihilator or this, which is, maybe I have a different, I'm judging it different now being older, but as a kid there was always at least one or two songs on almost every record that I would get, especially like older thrash stuff when I was way younger. Yeah, where I'd just be like, it'd be like the Skipper, sure. Like I'm trying to think of something like Testament or something, or like some of the ballads or something. Be like, I can do it.
I mean, there's I think the records that don't have that, obviously, your Master of Puppets and your Rain and Bloods and South of Heavens. Well,
Rain and Blood doesn't have any time to have any clunkers.
And there's some people who are critical of that record because they feel like that record is, Rain and Blood has a great opening and a great closing track, and then everything else in the middle just kind of blends. But it's like that's to an untrained ear. That's what I thought the first time I heard it, and then you start to hear those dynamics of every song. But anyways, that's Rain and Blood's a whole nother cup of tea that I don't want to get into. But then we've got the title track. We got two pretty fantastic numbers up, and None Shall Defy. It's just full of all these like cool solos and great chorus that you can kind of like scream along to. Very Exodus-y, I wrote down, especially in the chorus, and even in this opening riff that I hear here, I wrote down almost like a slowed down death metal riff, like a la Autopsy or Celtic Frost, like where it's a little bit trapped in Sabbath land still, but yet it wants to be like a great death metal riff. and then it kind of transitions back into the typical sort of Slayer Halloween's kind of riffs that are all over it.
The one thing Infernal Majesty didn't have is they didn't have crunch to their guitar sound at all.
Yeah.
Not like Metallica and Exodus, I think, had some of the best. Slayer to some degree, but they didn't really need it, except for, you know, like some of the breakdowns and stuff.
Because I feel like Lombardo, what he did with the bass drum was so revolutionary that it added like a bottom end to things that like some of those riffs didn't have to have as much crunch bottom end kind of feeling.
Yeah, I mean, Slayer's riffs are more like, they're more, you know, penetrating and cutting and like razor-like.
Slicing,
and not kind of momentum building or anything, so.
Yeah, and I wrote that the tune, the title track, None Shall Defy, it rises from the bowels of thrash hell, like Possessed almost. You know, this is, you know, Possessed is definitely a thrash metal band that became death metal almost, you know, and I feel like this is like their singular moment where they're kind of doing that in this song as well, you know. I mean, Night of the Living Dead had all these kind of different changes and stuff, and S.O.S. kind of has the Morbid Angel vibe, but this is like much more like in your face, very primitive kind of Possessed early Slayer.
What Possessed had going for them is they were fast.
Yeah.
But they didn't really do anything outside of they didn't really, I think, add a ton outside of the speed, the satanic angle. They write great songs, and I really like the band, but compare like them and Infernal Majesty, it's two different sides of.
Sure.
It had a more European vibe, I guess, like what you'd see in compared to like Obituary as opposed to Entombed.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, it comes with that Canadian thing we've said before, that a lot of the Canadian stuff connect it more with the Destruction, Sodom, and Creators of the world than it did the Metallicas,
thrash.
The Metallicas and Megadeths, you know. So, but you know, we were discussing this in the car too. Is like, you know, the anomaly of Slayer, because Slayer doesn't fit with any of the other big four, you know, or even Testament or
no, and there's
Exodus,
there's no one band where you can go back and say this is where Slayer was influenced by. It was just like it was a lightning in a bottle thing with, you know, I think Kerry King and Henneman had, I mean, it was just something magical happened between those two guys. They never really went beyond that boundary that they kind of made or created for themselves either, which is cool. But they've been able to like work within basically this entirely new genre and create their own vocabulary with, okay, this is what Slayer is. Here's these undefined parameters that you know we have to stay within to keep it Slayer. And
I think people get uncomfortable sometimes when they get really close to that edge, like they did sort of say in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they were kind of playing with a few things. But even now, if you go back and listen to those records, they still are way better than a lot of the stuff that was going on at that time. You know, and everybody goes
better than Metallica or Megadeth or any of the other big four.
Any of those, you know. So I don't want to.
They skidded close to the line, but a lot of the animosity, at least for me, was being young and pissed off because they changed, which I didn't understand why people would possibly change.
And now you get it. And I mean, in hindsight, Slayer is almost like the AC/DC of thrash. You know, I mean, they don't change that much, you know, and that's what people kind of want out of them. But they change enough to make it interesting.
Oh, totally.
Do some different things. But you know, Infernal Majesty sort of operates in that you can't really connect or you know, take these guys back and point them back to any of the Canadian bands we've listened to thus far. You know, they don't really fit. Like, you can't say, oh, from Exciter grew Infernal Majesty, you know, or from Voivod came Infernal Majesty. You know, they just sort of operate in a weird kind of bubble of their own.
Well, a lot of the interviews I've seen with a lot of these bands from that era, none of them really know if any of their contemporaries had any kind of influence on them. It's always classic stuff. So I don't know how, because they say the scene, at least in Toronto, I know the scene in Ontario is huge, but
that's where
Toronto,
these guys are from.
These guys are from Toronto, or Quebec is the big, that was the larger scene, I think, wasn't it?
Well, Quebec was the more extreme technical stuff, but these guys are definitely like Ontarioites, from what I've read. You know, they may have, you know, Toronto's in Ontario, so.
I don't know if there's two. Wherever they're from, there wasn't like it wasn't the huge metal scene. So I don't know if there's actually touring or if it was like kind of like every once in a while you get.
I think they just played a few clubs in Toronto, from what I read in the liner notes and stuff. You know, so I don't know, but yeah. So I mean, you know, a tune like None Shall Defy kind of summarizes that sort of like lightning in the bottle kind of thing, and then you get Skeletons in the Closet, which is the next tune. And I wrote that, you know, this has some of the best guitars on the whole record, and it's really like, it's almost like a guitar solo from start to finish with, like, you know, just solo and bursts and solos. It's kind of like you know, some of the stuff Slayer does, obviously. I mean, I know we keep coming back to that, but, you know, Slayer didn't always play traditional like solos where, like, you stop the song and there's a spotlight on, you know, Alex Skolnick or Kirk Hammett or something like that.
Yeah.
It was wherever they could like slice solos in.
Well, and some people call it, you know, that they didn't know what they were doing and they were, you know, novices at playing guitar, so that's why they did it. But those, just like how normal vocals don't fit on death metal music,
yeah,
you had to kind of step it up to that next level. And I don't know if I doubt Kerry King's, you know, the creator of the Dive Bomb lead or whatever.
Yeah.
But as far as integrating into their sound, there's no other way you can do a solo in a Slayer record and have it sound right.
Yeah.
You can't do this flurry of arpeggios and shit.
Sure.
It's just not going to sound right.
And the only time you could do that, and they used it wisely when they would get the opportunity to do it, is in songs like Seasons of the Abyss or South of Heaven, where it was a little bit slower tempo-wise. And like that solo in Seasons is a pretty like metal kind of solo.
Yeah.
But it works. And there's enough slices that like carry, you know, when Jeff's playing something clean, Carrie like slices through it, you know?
Totally, yeah.
And you hear a lot of that in Skeletons of the Closet here. You know, you've got a thematic sort of slow riff that does creep in like near the end here and there, but for the most part, this is a barn burner from start to finish. It's super fast. It's got all these short bursts, kind of solos going, and it's very technical. And that's the other thing about Infernal Majesty. These guys are so technical. If you really listen to like how they compose some of this stuff,
but it doesn't jump out like Voivod or something.
Yeah.
Somebody that has weird time signatures or like I think intentionally complex riffs.
Yeah.
But these guys are like, okay, here's 15 riffs. Well, I think we can fit these all in this one song, and they do it, and you're not drawing. There's no attention drawn to it.
Yeah. And you know, so when you do that kind of stuff, you're able to get away with the things that they can do on Skeletons of the Closet, which is, you know, super fast, super technical, and then all of a sudden they can do these like haunting slow moments, kind of like what you heard before on Night of the Living Dead, you know, where you can go through all these really like crazy tempo changes and stuff. So, but any I don't know if you had show notes or anything like that for any of the songs, or if you
I actually stopped at S.O.S. because something else came up.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So we'll lead forward with this. So, but we've got these are kind of the two centerpieces in the middle part of the record, and then things kind of start to wind down after this. So we've got None Shall Defy and Skeletons in the Closet.
Run your bomb soul. Get holy, embryo takes full. Divine into Defending, fighting, welcome back to the Dark Lord. Lord of evil, prince of darkness, we await the birth, the sign of black salvation. Unborn child, devil's spawn, amidst the sound of rending death, we gaze upon thy visage. Ride in the vent, in the gnashing of teeth and the welling of souls. Black, heavy scent, shiver to the flock, the musical snap and the multitude sing. None shall defy. None shall defy. fires of hell. Your soul escaped from mindless torment.
Skeletons in the Closet and None Shall Defy from Infernal Majesty. But we're gonna round things or wind things down here with the final two songs. And really, it's kind of a final 1.5 sort of songs because of the way that the last song kind of.
Path of the Psycho is pretty much just it doesn't need to necessarily be there, but it's, as everybody in the 80s did, there's the intro and there's the outro.
Yeah, I like this outro though. I think it's
interesting. It's
well.
It's not as cliche. It's not like a music box winding up.
No.
So.
The vibe I got from it actually, because it's all sort of bass driven. I wrote a kind of a creepier Blackened Dawn Patrol like Megadeth style. But I also get like a real big like Eucharist vibe from it because of like the way that Eucharist would use like their odd bass kind of things, especially on Mirror Worlds and stuff.
Well, they'd be playing bass on its own. It wouldn't be following the drum pattern at all. It almost like similar to like what Maiden would do, not gallopy, but kind of weaving in and out of the guitar lines.
Yeah, and so I kind of hear that here, and it's a very quiet ending to the record, but. A lot of people wrote that they love this song because of how this underlying evilness that was sort of there. And I wrote, it feels like the quiet flames of hell kind of welcoming you, at the very end. So
the gates have closed and it's your moment of contemplation.
Yeah, it's not a stock outro, I guess, and that's what I kind of dig about it. It's got a kind of a feel to it. But the song that precedes that and kind of, I guess, the last epic number, almost another 7-minute, 6 minutes and 51, is Anthology of Death. Again, a pretty evil sounding tune for sure. Very proto-death metal though. I mean, this is, Skeletons in the Closet, which you just heard, was very thrash oriented, and this is their kind of entryway. They're kind of leaving the dock of thrash behind and kind of floating.
It's not quite as up in the sound, but you start hearing that Swedish death metal tremolo riff started to come through, just kind of in the background. Another thing I don't think we brought up was something that was weird that I don't think a lot of American thrash bands are doing, at least, was it's and this is kind of like a signature for Norwegian black metal, is the open chords that were you'd strum like if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like what think of a Mayhem riff, how that sounds so totally, or what Dissection did a lot as well, so where it'd be like a power chord but then you'd do like a little bit of a strum afterwards that kind of reinforce those notes. I hear a lot of that in this as well,
and I think that's why black metal bands did turn to this, like Dawn, because even though it's proto-death metal, there's something like more sinister.
Well, and it's not complicated to play because you're holding the riff and it's all about riffing. Or it's all about the picking, and especially at least for the second generation of black metal, which was all about non-technicality and trying to pull on these kind of evil, I think, things without necessarily being a virtuoso at the guitar. or at least not drawing attention to yourself.
And these guys are great at that, in that, you know, they can hide their technicality sometimes if they need to, and just like go into outright brutality, and it doesn't bother them at all or take away from the songs, and one flows into the other just seamlessly, you know. But this is another song with another anthemic riff, very similar to sort of Night of the Living Dead, which had that kind of thematic riff throughout. You know, a lot of the solos in this song I wrote that there's like some Chuckisms almost kind of starting to bubble to the surface. This may have been the one that has like a riff in it where it almost sounded like Pull the Plug or Zombie Eaters or something like that.
Yeah,
I think it was this one, you know. And then you also get some melodic elements. I mean, I hear even like a slight Kirk Hammett or Alex Skolnick kind of moments, you know, kind of mixed in here. Great bass breakdown, accompanied by kind of just a fucking awesome riff that kind of breaks out of it.
Speaking of bass, you can actually hear the bass on this record, which, unlike Slayer, which I don't think you've ever heard, basically it's there to
At Dawn They Sleep, man. This is a great bass breakdown. that's it.
But they never play it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was there to fill space. But with Infernal Majesty and even like Annihilator, a lot of the Canadian bands seem like there's, I don't know if it's thanks to Geddy Lee, that there's a little bit more attention drawn to the bass. But it's nice to hear that again.
And that could be too, like, you know, with what we did last show, where, you know, the Voivods and the Cryptopsies, you know, made bass very apparent. You know, I mean, even Gorguts too, and it was partially because of that sort of technical thing that they can never get away from. You know, which maybe you're right. Maybe it is Rush and Geddy Lee and some of the foundational.
Well, thanks, Geddy Lee. I pretty much had it with you, but if you brought
maybe a renaissance of Rush,
as long as you don't open your mouth, you're a nice guy.
Yeah, and I can take small moments of Rush, especially their 70s stuff, and enjoy it. I don't get into a lot of Rush beyond that, though. You know, Moving Pictures is pretty much it for me.
And Working Man's just a Black Sabbath song.
Exactly. Great song. 2112. This is a pretty cool record. I used to have that on vinyl years ago. But then there's a cool part in the middle. It's kind of a very mid-paced, kind of sludgy part. Almost like Domination, Formulas Made Flesh, kind of Morbid Angel, just kind of slow down, but like thick as hell kind of riff. And then around the 5-minute mark of this, you get a very dark, atmospheric kind of doomy vibe to it or something. You know, it's kind of funeral-esque or something. But and then Anthology of Death, of course, goes into the aforementioned Path of the Psycho, which is kind of this 2-minute kind of outro bass-driven song that our good pal Psychopath wrote.
Yeah, and spelled wrong too.
Yeah, and
I wonder if that's just a typo or what, but
it's everywhere.
Psychopath certainly has an H in it. Yeah.
I don't know why.
And it's not like the Canadian spelling, you know, like adding an extra U in color or something. It's not. Why would you drop a consonant?
Maybe it was to prove a point. Yeah. Maybe it was just.
I'm so crazy I dropped my H's.
Yeah. Oh, crazy. Oh, man. That reminds me of a Voltron episode where Sven comes back and he's like, I'm so crazy. I'm so crazy. And remember they hadn't found him for like 3 years. He's just like wandering around.
He just comes out.
Yeah, Sven.
That's cool.
There's your Voltron. There's your toy reference around the holiday season for all you young girls and boys opening your presents.
Yeah, go see if you can find some Voltron toys.
Exactly. But so this is it. You know, 8 songs. If you buy the Displeased Records version, it comes with a couple bonus songs, which are pretty cool. But
Intro to Into the Unknown and Hell on Earth.
Yeah, and we sort of have chosen as a policy to kind of not spend time on a Hall of Fame record on the bonus tracks, whether they're amazing or not.
Yeah, we've set a precedent already, so we can't backpedal on that.
Yeah, no, there's laws, there's bylaws of Requiem Metal Podcast we can't break.
We're not flip-floppers like some politicians are.
Exactly. Oh man, this reminds me of the Outfox documentary where they do the montage of flip-flop on
John Kerry, man. Flip-flopper.
But so hopefully, if maybe you're like us, where you hadn't really discovered this record in a long time or never, and let us know what you thought about it. What you're, and again, if you know some of the other stuff about Infernal Majesty, some of their later stuff that holds up pretty well, let us know.
The history on them is pretty slim online, so there was a lot of research for this, and even sitting through that Much Music Power Hour thing.
Yeah, there's not a lot of interviews. There wasn't really much documented back in the day.
No, and all the videos you find are all stuff, contemporary stuff of them playing live. So,
but anyways, hopefully you enjoyed your journey through None Shall Defy.
Yeah, if Rick, Steve, or Kenny are out there, you want to get a hold of us, requiempodcast@gmail.com.
Exactly.
We'd love to talk to you.
And one other thing I forgot to mention is that these guys, a couple of the guys left after this. Rick and was it Psychopath? I think Rick and Psychopath both.
Yeah.
Chris Bailey and
Chris
Rick,
Bailey.
and they formed a band. I wrote it down. We haven't heard them. Was it Castle of Pain? Which I don't know. I don't even know if I could really listen to Castle of Pain just 'cause
Coming from a band, Infernal Majesty, with 2 umlauts to Castle of Pain with no umlauts, I don't know.
maybe they write all He-Man songs or something, like a He-Man concept record.
I don't
Masters of the
know.
Universe.
Castle of Pain just doesn't make any sense.
No.
It sounds like a Robert Jordan rock,
Or it sounds like a Vince
book.
Neil solo song, Sisters of Pain.
Yeah,
Yikes.
Sisters of Pain makes sense.
Yeah, that's true.
S&M.
Yeah.
Castle of Pain?
Yeah, maybe it's an S&M Palace.
Or it could be a Hammer horror movie. Who
There you
knows?
go. Yeah. So, but let us know what you thought. Recommendpodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on Facebook, Mark and Jason, or shoot
Leave us a star rating on iTunes Store. That's absolutely free, and
Yeah.
it actually makes people want to check us out.
Yeah.
And I know it's the Christmas season or the holiday season. Everybody spent lots of money, but as of the 4th, I'm going to be paying our next allotted bill for our web hosting.
Mm-hmm.
And any donation you'd like to give to the show is much appreciated, and it goes toward a good cause because this is all coming out of our own pockets.
Sure. and as a gift to you, you'll be getting a nice little, probably 2 or 3 parter around.
I think you're getting a 3-parter.
Yeah.
That's like a 3-piece suit of content.
3 downloads
for free.
in 1 week coming up with our year-end top records of the year. So be on the lookout for that around the New Year's holiday time. So enjoy your Christmas, your Kwanzaa, your Hanukkah, your Satan,
Your Antichrist
pagan
mass.
rituals, and enjoy Anthology of Death and Path of the Psycho from Infernal Majesty's None Shall Defy. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark, and have a pleasant solstice.